Hello, this is Morgan Turner, a political science student at the University of Tennessee, and this is Morgan's Politricks, kind of I guess the knockoff off-brand of Rick Wilson's Politricks from Rice University. And today we're going to be looking at an experiment done by social scientists and political scientists, Catherine Clayton, Charles Crabtree, and Haruchi. And they asked the question, which I thought was an interesting question. That's why I chose this experiment. Do identity frames impact support for multiracial candidates? And they decided to test this at a very good time towards the end of 2020 and early 2021 on Kamala Harris. And sorry, if I could get my PowerPoint to work, that'd be very nice. There we go. Sorry, little technical difficulty, but yeah. So the background of the experiment, which I've always noticed this too, and I thought it was a very interesting question. But they wanted like whenever you read things about politicians, a lot of times like minority politicians, they'll mention that that they're minorities. Like, oh, she's the first black whatever, or he's the first Asian whoever, they're the first Muslim whoever. And they wanted to know whether or not mentioning their racial or cultural or gender background, if that affected people's feelings toward them, if it affected support towards those candidates. And the research has been done before on this, and they had looked at it, but most of it was either inconclusive or small, or had only been done on hypothetical situations. Like, say we have a black candidate here, or say we have a female candidate here, how would you feel? But no like actual real world um, experiment. So they describe framing, and that's I'm going to use that phrase a lot. They're talking about racially framing and culturally framing. Framing they define as the act of describing politicians by how they appear. The media will frame them or frame them with attributes or frame them with a certain group. Um, and these political scientists, as I said, um, Catherine Clayton, Charles Crabtree, and Haruchi, um, they ran this during the election cycle of 2020. Um, and they decided to test it on Kamala Harris. So to do this, they they shortly after Kamala Harris was nominated as Joe Biden's nominated as she'd already been announced as his running mate, but this was after the Democratic convention, so they'd been nominated for the Democratic candidates for the presidency. So like I think this took place a couple days afterwards, August 2022. Um, they gave out they sorry. In August 2022, they had 3,050 voters who had voted in the primaries and were planning on voting in the presidential election in November. They s- um, they took these 3,050 people and they took these 3,050 people and they stratified them into 16 subgroups based on gender, race, and political alignment. And then they randomly assigned the participants in those 16 subgroups into four different treatments. And then there's a fifth group, which I probably should have put on the PowerPoint. but which the fifth group was the control. But I have these four groups here represented with the people icons. But in the first group, they gave the people articles that referred to Kamala Harris, talking about her nomination. They only referred to her as a woman. In the second group, they gave them articles about Kamala Harris being nominated, and they only referred to her as a black woman. In the third group, they gave the people articles only referring to Kamala Harris as an Asian woman. And then in the fourth group, they gave um, they gave the participants articles that only referred to her as a black and an Asian woman. Because as you know, I probably should have said it. She Kamala Harris is, I believe she has Indian background, and then I believe her father was Jamaican or from the Caribbean islands, and then her mother is from India, I believe, or somewhere in Asia, Southern Asia. But yeah, but the results, the way they did this was they had them read the articles and then they answered a few questions using a Likert scale. And I defined the Likert scale right here, which is a multi-item measure in which the items are selected based on their ability to discriminate between those high scoring and those low scoring on the measure. So basically, it's like, I'm sure you've probably seen them. It's like, how do you feel about this? Agree, neutral, strongly disagree, or just disagree. And they asked them those questions about Harris after reading the articles. If she was the right choice to be Biden's running mate, if they supported Trump, um, and I put the black thumbs down right there, not because like I dislike Trump or anything. That's just kind of like we don't like Harris, we prefer Trump. Um, if she's ready for president, ready to step in for Joe Biden, if whenever he takes office, he were to get sick or die or something like that, if she would be ready to fill the shoes immediately. And if she's good for justice, racial justice wise, after reading those articles about her nomination, based on how they described her, they wanted to see how people would answer on these Likert scale questions. And and the scientists found the effect sizes were consistently very small. Um, the like I said, sorry, fumbling over my words here. They were very small. Um, they saw very little impact with a confidence level of 95%. The authors stated the effect sizes are consistently very small. The substantive magnitude of the estimated effects in absolute terms vary from 0.3%, 0.03% to 5.92% of the standard deviations of the outcome of the variables among participants in the control group. And they found that compared to the headline that ignores race and gender altogether, none of the other headlines changed voters' attitudes towards Biden's choice, towards Trump, or towards Harris's ability to lead, or toward their belief that her candidacy will advance racial justice. So basically, there wasn't really any change. And if there was change, it was very small, not enough to say that mentioning her race or not mentioning her race or mentioning her gender or not mentioning her gender really changed how people felt. Um, sorry, there's that last quote. I just read that. So then they decided to run the experiment again. And this time they ran the experiment. This time, whenever they ran the experiment, they had a slightly bigger group. I didn't put the number there, but I believe it was 3,900. Yeah, it was 3,931 voters. This second experiment, instead of uh, instead of the 5,050, and they ran this experiment in January, I believe, like a day or two after she was inaugurated as uh as vice president. So as you know, she won. So now they're seeing they asked voters again um, if her race affected how they felt about her after she was nominated, her race and her gender, of course. And this time they did a bigger study. They did it the same way. Um, they had they broke up the group into stratified groups and then separated them by race and gender and all those great things. And then they randomly placed them into different groups. Um, but this time they added more groups. So they had 7 independent variables and then 1 control. And as I've listed these independent variables here, one group again, women, black women, Asian women, black and Asian women. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I screwed that up really bad. They gave them articles referring to Kamala Harris as either a woman, a black woman, an Asian woman, a black and Asian woman, a black person, an Asian person, or a black and Asian person. So basically they wanted to see if gender had anything to do with it. They focused more on gender this time as well as race, so it's kind of equal. And then of course there's the control group where it was completely racially and gender neutral, and it reported on her inauguration. And this is a quote from the article. These no results are driven by issues related to temporal value, i.e., the context which we ran the survey. And this was referenced in the article a few times. Construct validity, the bundling of gender and race treatment in our initial study, or our external validity. And this is basically their reasoning for running a second experiment, is my understanding. Oh, there's the stat. See, I should have gone over this a little more before I did it. Yeah. So they ran it. I think that was a week after she was nominated, January 29th through January 30th, 2021, and they surveyed 3,931 voters that voted for her, or not voted for her, but voted in general. And the results of that second experiment, um, along with the changes like more adding more people to the group and adding more surveys with different scenarios mentioning her race without her gender. They also added a few more questions. Um, oh, and in some of them, they also added Biden's name to some of the articles. But they added the question, good for equality. And it was also done in the Likert scale, like the agree, disagree, somewhat disagree, yada, yada, yada. And the post-inauguration surveys, they saw a more impactful increase for Harris and for Biden, but it wasn't really a large increase, and it wasn't across the board either. The people who read the racially framing article that strictly referred to Harris as a black woman had a higher confidence in Harris on all of the questions, and compared to the people in the control and in the post-nomination experiment. The increase of confidence in Harris, there was an increase in confidence in Harris by about 0.8, 0.18 to 0.21 points on the 5-point Likert scale, and an increase in support for Biden by about 0.16 points. And they also found an increase in support for Harris by those who read the articles that just mentioned her race, but not her gender. There was no systematic pattern to these outcomes like the ones with the Black women articles. So, I mean, it's right there. It's right. I wrote it right there. There's there was some increase. The biggest there was increase uh, across the board, but mostly the only significant increase was um was in the articles that specifically described her as a black woman. And conclusions on the experiment. Um, the experimenters, like we just saw, concluded that framing Harris as a black woman, as framing Harris, framing a candidate in this case, Harris, as a black person or a woman may impact the support for that candidate or the faith in that candidate on certain issues, but there's little to no impact on support for candidates framed as multiracial or as minority races. Even with these results, there does not appear to be a systematic pattern or effective gender or race-based cues on the voting and the population's support for a candidate. And that's another phrase that they used quite a bit was race-based cues. That's I guess that's um, race-based cues are what frames is what they use to frame a person in an article with their race. Excuse me. But yeah, overall to recap, there is there might be some slight effects of mentioning someone's race or mentioning someone's gender on how people feel about a candidate, especially if they're a minority specifically. That's what was looked at in this experiment. But it's not significant enough to say that's a fact. It may affect some people, but it's not like an overall, like, proven thing, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. Um, and yeah, like this was a really fun article to read. I thought it was pretty easy to read. I liked breaking it down. I recommend anyone who's watching this video to take a look at it because it's pretty good. I feel like I didn't do it justice. Um, I don't know. I like politics, so I thought it was a fun read. I thought it was interesting. Um, and yeah, there you have it. Um, Racial frames do not really affect how people view overall. Don't really affect how people view um, politicians or how much they support politicians. At least not enough to where it makes a significant effect. And those are my sources. I cited the book to get a couple definitions, and I cited obviously the article. And yeah, thank you so much for watching Morgan's Politics. Hope I didn't bore you. I hope I didn't confuse you. I hope I did this article enough justice to where if you read it, it didn't seem like I left a whole bunch out. And that is all. Thank you so much.